to all our guests who are following us on the streams. We're streaming right now to my personal page on Facebook, to African Renaissance, which is another page I have on Facebook, and of course onto YouTube as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My guests have had an incredibly busy day because they're all very busy people, but they have struggled to get into the studio on time, and I'd like to get cracking straight away. Uh, for those who are on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel. It's called Ted Kofi. And comment, share, and encourage your friends to have a look at the content. Because by so doing, what you do is that you actually raise our profile within the YouTube community. And of course, it's a matter of enlightened self-interest. But if we produce the content that you like, then it amplifies your voice on YouTube. So please subscribe, comment, share. Thank you so much. Now, I have to introduce what we're going to talk about tonight. UK Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget unveiled the biggest tax giveaway in 50 years, overwhelmingly benefiting the better off. It was planned to be paid for from additional government borrowing. Now, the cuts in tax were presented without the top cover of an Office of Budget Responsibility report. Now, that's the independent agency we have in the UK that is charged with judging the feasibility of government budgets and that sort of thing. Experts, however, estimated that Mr. Kwarteng's budget created a hole of 60 billion, that's with a B, 60 billion pounds in the public accounts, and was rapidly named the kamikaze or suicide budget. The money markets were swift in their response. Within days, sterling had dropped to an all-time low of £1.03 against the dollar, as the cost of UK government borrowing also spiked sharply. The Chancellor was ordered back from a meeting at the IMF and fired. Jeremy Hunt, his replacement, made a rapid U-turn days later, but not before some families found themselves suddenly having to find an extra £500 a month to pay their mortgages as interest rates were raised, and all in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Now, Kwarteng, serving as Chancellor, was the first minister of African origin in one of the four great offices of state in the UK. He lasted just 38 days and was the second shortest serving Chancellor ever, while his PM, Liz Truss, shortly after, became the shortest serving PM, resigning her untenable position after just 44 days in office. Most of the media focus was initially on the Chancellor and his performance. Today, I'm asking what impact Kwarteng's spectacular, I must say, failure in office will have on the lives of PAOs, as I call people of African origin, in any high executive office in the UK. Will people be prepared to trust them? We cannot also help but consider the leadership change that's just happened, just hours ago, where Britain has selected her first Asian Prime Minister. Just look at the optics. The person of African origin was in office and crashed and burned. And now Britain is handing her fortunes into a more senior office into the hands of the first Asian British recipient of that title. Not only the first one, the youngest prime minister in 200 years as well. So look, whatever happened to Mr. Kwarteng, I'd like my guests to comment first of all on why we have an Asian prime minister. My guests are, let me introduce them. We have here Dean Okine. Dean is the chair and founder of the ADPAC, which is a community interest company charged with the development, with a mission to develop opportunities, particularly for young people of African origin here in the United Kingdom. It's a very, very powerful organization which is making great strides all the time. My next guest is Chioma Phillips. She is editor of Msinga Africa magazine, based in Kenya, from where she's joining us tonight. And Chioma's magazine is a general interest, cultural interest, political interest publication with an active profile on YouTube. Please follow and subscribe to her work. Finally, not quite finally, I've got two other great guests here. The other guest is Elaine Bannerman. Now, Elaine Bannerman is the founder of the Pan-African Tech Foundation, PATF, whose mission is to, as she says, leave no African behind in the drive to enskill and particularly young Africans with the tech credentials, training, and capability that they need to compete in the modern world. And now I get to my pièce de résistance, as they call it. She is one of my favorite academics ever. And here we have Professor Louise Owusu-Kwarteng. We will question you on the name later.
It's my dad's fault, that.
Okay, all right. This is Professor Louise Kwarteng, who is a professor of sociology. Owusu Kwarteng, who's a professor of sociology at London's Greenwich University. Everybody, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Now, first off, who's going to kick off? How did we wind up getting Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom? Dean, off you go.
Well, the first thing to understand is that the game is stacked. The actual game, the competitive game, is one. English women are competing English men. They've managed to rope some women of other ethnicities to fight their men, who may believe that they're fighting against their own men. But they've always only been fighting against men, and it started with the suffragettes and it's continued ever since. They're just very shrewd in how they pick those. So the two key challenges to male domination are African men and European women. So it doesn't matter how much you think the game is stacked when you see the optics of inclusion. Clearly optics. All you have to understand is there's no such thing as a river without banks. And that river runs through a current. That current is the power. That power is in legislative measures, and it is with the stroke of a pen people's power away. The institution that was capable of doing that was the Bank of England. So they were never going to last, because all the Bank of England has to do is flex its muscle or keep its arms still. Sunak is a bird of a similar feather. Birds of a feather fly together. Asians will into Africa to control Africans, and this is why Idi Amin did what he did. This is why many other Africans have had these challenges in their nations. And when we hear about Kenya and South Asian being from Africa, we understand they've been by the colonies as a means of control. Rishi Sunak is no different. Rishi Sunak is no threat to the status quo, not only based on education, but based on his core and principal values.
So what you're saying is that Dean, is that basically Rishi Sunak is just like the UK establishment, just with a slightly more, should we say, exotic skin tone? Is that what you're saying?
Perfect suntan. Okay. The perfect suntan. He's going to maintain tax havens. He's going to maintain every business need. He speaks their language, and it will become a government of serfs and landowners. And the landowners they'll get the tax breaks they require, and pretty much everything that was delivered through that mini budget, they're going to benefit behind the scenes.
Okay, terrific. Now, that's your view. Let's go next to Chioma. Now, Chioma, I know that you're an expat, and You must sit there. You must sit there in Africa. Are you laughing? By the way, are you laughing at our situation in the United Kingdom? Bearing in mind, Kenya was one of the former colonies. What do you make of what we're going through at the present time?
So, I think it's hilarious, and I love, I love what Dean said. It's absolutely spot on. This is just another puppet that they brought in, the same way they brought in Obama, so that he can sign on the dotted line wherever they say and do whatever it is he's told to do, like a good little boy. And you know, here we have people calling him a Kenyan Indian simply because his father is of Kenyan, whatever, he was born in Kenya, or whatever. But you know, claiming him like, yeah, this is our property, this is great. The only reason he is in that job is because he is useful to somebody, just the way the Tata Group of companies was useful, so they took over production of Land Rovers or whatever. There's just this whole script, you know, again, World Economic Forum and all the people behind it and the different people in different groupings who are trying to make sure that the world moves in a specific direction. But it's all quite hilarious and very interesting to see that the UK is also not a free country. So I'm just wondering who exactly the top guy is. It isn't. Whatever has happened in the last month or so is just basically an indication that there's someone who's behind the scenes watching and saying, no, not the script. No, not the script. Stop it. Remove this one, bring this one. Okay, that one will toe the line. Okay, great. Then bring this other one. That one will also toe the line. Fantastic. Now things are back on an even keel. Because every single nation has to go in a specific direction. Otherwise, there's going to be some destabilization. But I think that whether they like it or not, the destabilization will happen. And people who are aware and who are watching will be like, oh, okay, it's good to know that the UK is as hopeless and helpless as everyone else. And so that means that we should just gather ourselves together now, speaking specifically of Africa, and just do our thing the way that we should have a long time ago, because they don't really know what's going on. They are not the ones who are the top dog. They're being sent around like lackeys as well, just, you know, doing the bidding of somebody somewhere. So if that's them and they're supposedly, you know, big brother to us, then kick them out and let's just move on.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm breathless. Just to think that I was in a rather different broadcast environment this afternoon, and I was talking on LBC, which is one of our big radio stations here in the United Kingdom, and the conversation was really rather more muted than what I'm hearing here at the moment. Okay, next, Elaine. What's your take? I mean, where are we now in the UK with Rishi Sunak coming in and so on?
I think that I just like to say it's quite interesting because Obama was also of Kenyan descent, with Rishi Sunak also of Kenyan descent. If anything goes wrong, we'll blame the Kenyan. And I think that my view is pretty much who's the best person for the job. We have a generation leadership at the moment who are quite young and have an issue with maturity in many ways. You know, the question is who is the right person?
Can I ask Elaine, sorry, excuse me interrupting, generation of what and of who?
Oh, a generation of leadership.
Okay.
We have in
government. In politics, you mean?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I'm saying that they're much younger than, you know, that we've seen, and I just think that the chaos has just been caused by confusion. I mean, a lack of maturity, a lack of direction, and a lack of really doing in the positions that they find themselves. And actually, that's what I think. Why should he be prime minister? Because he's probably the best person amongst the pack for the job, and that's it. Also, that is particularly because Kwasi Kwarteng messed up, as whereas Rishi Sunak seemed to have been an erstwhile chancellor, and perhaps the situation we have, we need the best person to come and take us out of our woes, and this is really the best person for the job. And honestly, that's all I've got to say about this. I'm not sure anyone pulling strings anywhere. I just think the current one pack that we have, a pack of people who are very immature and not quite knowing what to do. And that's what I think.
Okay, there's the diversity of views here. I'm going to go to the prof. Please.
Okay.
What do you make? What do you make of where we are now?
Right, I have a few thoughts on this. So I'd like to just sort of, think about what Elaine said in terms of maturity, because I think sometimes what tends to happen is that we think that because someone is young, it doesn't mean to say that, like they're not always mature. But I think sometimes it does depend on their life experience, what they've been exposed to, because you might get someone who is of a similar age to Rishi, but that has had a very different life experience, so their level of maturity. So I don't always attach maturity to age. Sometimes it depends on what it is that they've been through. But in terms of why, I mean, one thing about the Conservatives, they're very good at optics. Okay. So I suppose, when you think about that, I suppose that age comes into that, because there's there's an intersectional aspect. So there's age, there's race, there's gender, but then, there's also class. And I'll come to that in a minute. So I think what you've got with someone like Richie, or what you've got with someone like Kwasi Kwarteng, or even Kemi Badenoch and all of them, I think what you've got is you've got a lot of people who, they may look like us, but in terms of class, they've had a very different experience in terms of where they've gone to school, where they've gone to university, and, they've amassed a certain amount of kind of cultural and social capital, which fits the brief. Because I think sometimes when you're moving in those circles, you learn to speak a certain way, you learn to see, you have a particular worldview. So because their worldview and their experience and their backgrounds fit that brief, then, it's fine. But then also because they're brown or they're black or whatever, then, it in a weird way. I mean, as I say, with the optics, it's like, okay, well, here we are. We're just kind of we have a diverse group of people. Yes, on the optics, in terms of the way you look, but then when it comes to life experience and class and everything, maybe not so much there. Also, I think in terms of Rishi Sunak, I think that he's seen as kind of like a safe pair of hands. That is the perception, because it's almost like he's been tried and tested. He was the Chancellor before, and we're in a horrendous economic situation. So this is perhaps had a bearing on the decisions. But my thing is that it's just like, okay, we're going to see what he does. We're going to see what he does. Okay, he was Chancellor before, but he wasn't Chancellor for all that long. So we're going to see what he does in terms of his premiership, because being a Chancellor and being a Prime Minister, I think they're two very different things. So we will see what we do. So I think it's a lot to do with background. I think it's to do with optics, but then also I think, okay, where are we going to go with this? So that's my thoughts.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come back now to the whole question of, let me bring myself back into the studio here, and reduce Louise. I'm going to come back. There is this, one of you alluded to this thing called the glass cliff. And the glass cliff is, Louise, do you know about the glass cliff?
I know about the glass ceiling and I know about the concrete ceiling, but not the glass cliff. I think I might know what it means, though.
I'm sure you do. See, the glass cliff is supposed to be this phenomenon whereby minorities are used to do the dirty jobs or the dangerous jobs. So if the whole thing goes belly up, then the establishment can turn around and say, well, we always knew that, you know what they're like. They're not really up to the job anyway. But aren't we fantastic for even giving them a chance at such elevation by making them take all the risks? So it's a kind of virtue signaling with an insurance policy attached, so that if you come a cropper on a really tough wicket that you're batting on anyway, people, they blame you. And then afterwards, you get somebody else to come along with a safer pair of hands to sweep up after you. And then they can say that, well, look, what you did was so awful that now we've really got a hole to dig ourselves out of, and so they're covered. That's a glass cliff. Now, there's also another thing associated with that, which I'd now like you to comment on, whereby if a person from a minority ethnic background does something which isn't particularly kind of meritorious, his failure is spread across the entire ethnic group. If, however, a person of European origin does something which is deleterious, not very meritorious, he's the individual failure. And his failure doesn't attach to anybody else. In fact, other people are still considered exceptional, brilliant, good, sane, sensible, talented, etc., etc. But so with this double standard of kind of liability, how do you think, first of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, how do you see the impact of Kwasi Kwarteng's it was a spectacular car crash, on the rest of our community? I'm going to start with Dean there.
Hey, it's a game, but it's not child's play. So in understanding that, slow exposure leads to wider adoption. And if you will define us through propaganda under a particular lens, Africans specifically, through a European lens, and always allude to that failure, that disappointment, that criminality from the one applying to the all, you're establishing a very powerful global lens. This is understood and is highly intentional. It's adopted through what is called a line to take in all owned news media. Kanye has touched on some things that I wouldn't. I would just say that economic speculators will always own all media, because if you set up an institution, it's never going to leave the hands of your family and a small cabal. And it is for the purposes of controlling a narrative. So when it comes to Kwasi, he never represented us, not in the optics, because he would always be quick to say he isn't a black politician as a man of African origin. And I agree with him. He never was. So let him die a coward's death alone, where he never represented us and didn't want to represent us, as someone who continually doesn't represent us. If he represented us, he would have creamed his skin before he went on broadcast. He would have removed the mutter from his mouth. He would have articulately said that as a man of African origin, we have been undermined from the beginning, as Walter Rodney's writings always said.
Okay, that doesn't answer the question of whether or not how he performed will be used to judge other people.
They can attempt, but there's no reason that any African executive should utilize it. And I think it's a stretch for us to apply the Chancellor of the Exchequer's experience to any executives in the country. And anybody who brings it up, you simply remind them that this is a prejudice. Of course they will attempt. And of course there will be a lens that they cast doubt, but they do it amongst themselves. Because were anybody to say that publicly in the climate that we're in, we also know how to weaponize that, give it GPS, and how to get rid of them.
I see. Okay, right, Dean. I'm gonna go to Chioma. Chioma, do you think that the Chancellor? I mean, Dean's been very articulate in the way he's explained that this man. He actually said that he considered it racist people to judge the rest of us. For people to judge him as a representative of Black or people of African origin executives. He called that racist. So he didn't see himself as that. But will society nevertheless still use that standard, the fact that physicality is used to say that
I'm sorry, I lost you there for a second.
No, what I'm saying is that, do you think society tends to judge all minority ethnics according to the action of one minority ethnic, whether or not that person sees himself as a representative of that community?
When it's convenient, they do try, and for instance, they try it with women. If a woman fails, it's all women. Oh, women are terrible drivers. Women cannot do this. Women cannot do that. Oh, it's just impossible. And it's just something that's just, it's a pettiness that people choose to activate and to use as and when they find convenient. Now, whether or not society will accept that is another story, because now it will depend on the maturity of the environment around the people who are trying to generate the nonsense around such a story. Because if they actually try and pin the so-called failures of one person on the entire community of people, then that is utter pettiness. And a mature and wise and discerning people will be able to notice that this is utter rubbish and knock it off and move on with their lives, acknowledging that the failures of an individual are the failures of an individual. Why do they have to apply to an entire community or an entire race of people or entire continent of people? So yeah, that's my perspective.
So it should have no effect so long as the people are mature enough. Louise, over to you. Now, you've got to shed light on this one.
Okay.
What do you make of the generalization of the failure of one person across an entire group, whether they're women, Black people, Asian people, etc.?
Okay, so first of all, we shouldn't do it, because at the end of the day, we're not, as Black people, we're not a homogenous group. We're all different. We've all had different experiences. I'll come on and I'll talk about, even though having Kwarteng is the same name, I'm a very different person. But anyway, I think we shouldn't be doing it. But at the same time, I think, okay, so if we're just bringing it down to this guy, I think what it is that sadly, historically, there has this been perception of our intelligence being lower than any other people, and this is kind of like rooted in that sort of scientific racism. Okay, and then what we've seen is the way that this has just kind of like been persistent throughout the generation, and you can see how it kind of seeps into different areas, like the media, like the education system, like in workplaces. In terms of policing, you can see how that's just seeped in. And then, like when it is being sort of like perpetuated within the media and all these things are kind of amalgamating and working together, this is when we have a problem. Okay, so in that sense, so we know where these ideas are coming from, and we know that these ideas are kind of like constantly being remanifested and kind of normalized. But we know it's not true. And I think going back to Choma's point about how, like it's a pettiness. I mean, I would say that it's stronger than that. But like at the same time, like if I do agree that people are discerning. And I think we are those people, being the fact that we're often the victims of it, we are discerning, but not everybody is. The media, when it will perpetuate things, that will make things even worse, right? So, we know that that's not the case. But I think in his case, I really think it hasn't helped. I don't think it's helped the way that, we've been seen in terms of like, professionality, in terms of intelligence. Well, we can come to that in a minute, but in terms of in the way that we go about doing things, I don't think it's helped. But in a sense, I don't think it's going to sort of make it's going to be one of those like 9-day. It is a bit of a 9-day wonder, because like we're not hearing so much about it now because other things are happening.
Yeah.
But it's going to be one of those 9-day wonders. But it's not. It's like because we've always had to sort of like we've always had those kind of negative labels attached to us in terms of our intelligence and our professionality. In a sense, it's not going to make. I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference and stuff. So in a sense, it's just nothing new.
Business as usual.
Sorry, it's
business
as usual. I mean, it hasn't helped. It hasn't helped, but it is business as usual, and it's been a long-standing thing. And you know, I'm just as somebody who sort of like specializes in race and education. I mean, you know, you could get some people who have got as many qualifications as Kwasi Kwarteng has, or like those kids at Brampton Manor and all this and the other. People will still buy into that dominant narrative, and I like to think that, you know, now.
All right,
that
can you explain what Brampton Manor is? Because
okay, yeah, sorry. So Brampton Manor is a school in West Ham, and West Ham is in one of the most deprived areas of London and in the UK. But you know, you get bare children going to sort of like Oxford and Cambridge from that school, and they're getting amazing A-level results. And a lot of them are Black and minority ethnic kids. But like, you know, even though you get many cases like that, unfortunately, that long-standing narrative of around our intelligence, it's not changing, you know. So I think in this sense, you know, if people have bought into narrative and you've got powerful people reinforcing that narrative, we know different, but society that's got to shift.
I see. I'm going to go to Elaine now. Elaine, what do you make of that, of this business about the sin of one person being kind of generalized across an entire ethnic group?
I don't see any reason why what I wouldn't even would be generalized across the ethnic group. I think what would rather hard across the ethnic group is that a bold, brave, super intelligent black man decided to that he thought would work. Now, for those of us bold, brave, super black men and women who may find ourselves in various positions of leadership, organizations that are predominantly, there's no reason why we shouldn't, you know, and implement policies, make decisions that we think are the right decisions to. The question then is whether those decisions are acceptable by us. I mean, it doesn't mean that we still haven't gone there. We still haven't done what we thought was the best thing to do at any time. The fact that somebody doesn't feel is the best thing doesn't mean you failed. It just seemed it probably wasn't the right time. Kwarteng's perspective, the general public hadn't what he was trying to achieve. He really thought that it was a policy that might work, but it's something that, because he has written on his he had probably gone through this over and over in his mind, and as far as he was concerned, maybe it wasn't tried and tested, but it could be revolutionary. He didn't fail. He's not a failure. He tried and it wasn't accepted by all. He considers himself a failure at all. I would say Kwasi Kwarteng considers himself someone who tried. Lots and lots of people who would rather toe the line than step out and be revolutionary. And he's done exactly that. He hasn't failed. And I'm hoping that this would actually rather the young Black people coming up and a lot more Black people in leadership positions to know that with you stepping out and doing what you think is right for an organization, or what you think is is right for a population in government, whether it's accepted, whether it's seen as failing or not, it doesn't make. So for me, he's still as bold and confident as he's always been. And that's the way I want to see Black people in leadership position.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. You're the only person I've heard say what you're saying anywhere, Elaine. It may speak to your own sense of confidence, but I know that Louise wants to come in on this one. Louise, so I've forgotten the question now. What was the question?
Basically, whether what Kwasi Kwarteng did is going to just kind of mess it up for the rest of us.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. I thought you had spoken already, but I just saw your note.
No.
Please enlighten us.
Okay, so I have spoken already, but I just wanted to respond to Elaine's point. So Elaine, I totally agree with you in the sense that, you know, like we should be bold and confident because, you know, like when we've been talked down for so long and everything, and we have amazing abilities and everything that we do is, you know, like it should be seen differently. I agree with that. And I think sometimes, you know, like there is nothing wrong with, you know, going out and doing something. And if it goes wrong, then you learn from it, then you do the next thing. But I think in this case, I mean, knowing that society, I mean, knowing what is going on in society, knowing that we are in the middle of a cost of living crisis, okay, your advisor is kind of like trying to hint at you not to do this, because I mean it's not just him, to be fair, because it was Liz Truss. I mean, she had her ways of what she wanted to do. I mean, you know, we keep talking about growth, and you know, like she wanted to sort of like adopt a Thatcherite way, but you know, like sometimes you have to do these things step by step. But we're at the moment, we are in a horrendous situation. You know, people's mortgages have gone up. People can't even eat. And, you know, like, I'm sorry, but like, at the end of the day, you know, like we know that this is what is going on in society, but yet you can't, sometimes you can't, you have to look around you before you make a decision. And I think this is where it sort of went a little bit wrong for him. You know, sometimes you have to step back. I'm not saying don't be bold, and I don't say that as Black people that we shouldn't be, but like in a situation like that, when you know, even before he was the Chancellor, you know that this is what is going on. I think sometimes you have to, like, you know, stop and look. That's what I think.
Stop and think.
Yeah.
I tend, I mean, I'm supposed to be the neutral umpire here. I tend to go with you there. I think that it's great to take risks, but you've got to cover your tracks and you've got to cover your back as well.
It's people's lives as well.
Having said that, it is so easy to overlook the point that Elaine is making, that when people are beaten down all their lives, they actually lose their edge and their verb and their vim. So I'm going to go now to Chioma. Chioma, what would you like to add to this?
Twice now, I have seen what I would call a resistance mounted against the administration of the day. The first time was when the Uhuru-Ruto government was voted in 2013, and the second time.
Hang on a minute. You're talking about Kenya.
Yes, in Kenya.
Okay.
And this time around when Ruto has been voted in as president. In both instances, the opposition and whoever it is they were collaborating with mounted a very active, very strong counter, like, what do we call it? Counter popularity movement against the administration of the day, trying to make them look like nothing, like they're not doing anything, like they can't achieve anything, working in every sort of way to undermine the very policies that were being put in place that were actually positive, you know, on the surface. But then because they met the resistance of people who had a lot of backing in the establishment or through other devious means, things just were not looking like they were going right. So we cannot overlook the possibility of sabotage. It's a very real possibility. We can say that he failed, or we can look deeper and start to ask questions like, why? I mean, this guy with all of his academic qualifications and, you know, his obvious passion for the country, you know, his birth, despite his parents' heritage and whatever, this guy would have done something like this, and then it would be such an epic fail. We have seen it live in Kenya. A good policy or something that actually would have been robust and good for the people just cut down. And then it comes out like such a major embarrassment against the state. And if you're watching keenly, you will see everything that's going on. If you're not, you will be up in arms against the very administration that you voted in. So I would just say maybe we look at every single angle possible and not kill the guy yet.
I don't think anybody's killing the guy. All it is that, I mean, I'm just saying that I think sometimes when you are doing things like this, you have to look at what is going on around you, because he did have like his advisor and stuff, and then that guy got fired. So I just think sometimes you have to look at what is going on. I mean, on the surface, I don't know, because I'm not of that sort of like political angle or anything like that. You know, I agree. He maybe thought it was the right thing to do, maybe, but I think you have to think, is it the right thing to do for everybody? Because you are in that position of power. So I think you're right. You have to look at all of the angles, but you have to also think, who is this going to affect as well?
It's very interesting. It's the moment you produce a counter narrative of this kind, you're immediately kind of identified as a conspiracy theorist these days.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't want to be muted by people calling me a conspiracy theorist or my channel a conspiracy theory factory. However, I do like people to share their points of view, and I think that people should be free to express what those points of view are. I'm going to delve into something else about the contrast between, say, Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister now of the United Kingdom, and Kwasi Kwarteng. Richie is 42 years old, Kwasi's a little bit older. Both had elite educations. Kwarteng is acknowledged as the brain box in both houses of parliament. Everybody knows this kind of thing. He had his PhD under 30 years old. However, Richie speaks Hindi, practices Hinduism, and identifies in every way as an Asian Brit. And it doesn't take away from his Britishness. Kwasi, I don't believe speaks any of his languages of origin, which is common for many people of African origin, and so on. So do you think that he is further undermined by his lack of an identity which gives him substance and strength in the face of adversity? Does that matter at all? Anybody, if you raise your hand, I'll see you in the chat, because Dean, okay.
Yeah. I think it's incredibly naive for us not to think that every single factor matters when you come into politics. And if you don't have a good grasp on your identity, then we know you are of a particular ilk. And when it comes to Africans, remember, we were entered into a 500-year European black experiment. And by and large, we've adopted the black branding. And with that black branding, there are a number of tropes that come with that we fall into. Within these tropes, we choose, by and large, irrespective of our initial ideologies, to capitulate to the system that is, because who else is going to pay us? So if you are an intellectual of Kwasi, it doesn't matter if you have any particular ideology. There are very few places for you to maneuver. And coming out of the education that he has, he's going to fall into a particular trough. And I would say that Kwasi is the perfect avatar for somebody who has gone into that education system, come out, been as successful as they identify you to be. But then we have to mirror that, don't we? With a man who is in and of, who upholds, promotes, and preserves his culture, and there's a solid base from his own community. So he's of value, not only as a British Prime Minister, but also in terms of a huge growth trade partner in India. We have to look at the macro as opposed to the micro. We have to look at growth, and we have to look at a chairperson as opposed to a position CEO. So all Kwasi was capable of doing at his highest point was being an appointed CEO, as opposed to a Rishi Sunak, He is capable of being a self-positioned chair, capable of creating economic growth in Blighty. Now, if we look at tech in India, huge growth. If we look at, even when it comes down to food security and the adoption of the genetically modified seeds, irrespective of whether they have any nutritional value, people can consume without dying. And our friend Bill Gates has made sure that they will have crops for perpetuity. And Rishi Sunak is capable of being right at the center of that. And he proved it by removing his moral compass as a banker. And what we do know is that all societies that govern this barren little island have an agreement that they are a cabal. So let's not get too much into conspiracy theories, and let's just consider ourselves political analysts that are studying patterns that are continuous.
Okay, I'm going to go to Louise. Louise, did you want to say something about the issue of identity and so on?
Yeah. So, I mean, okay. So, Dean, I hear what you're saying and everything, but I think sometimes, maybe I'm a little biased because I am a micro sociologist. So I think you have to look at the micro and the macro. So I think we just look at meso. So, like, you know, I think personal experience just kind of like influences wider things and what you do. So, all right. So in terms of identity, all right. So as I say, we both have the same surname except Owusu. I must emphasize the Owusu here. The scary thing is as well is just like, you know, we were born 4 days apart, so we're exactly the same age, but we've had very, very different life experiences. So I grew up in the Midlands. I grew up in Nottingham. And I was very much centered in, I was rooted in the Ghanaian community in the Midlands. So I have a very strong sense of that side of myself as much as I have a side of my British side. So, and also, I mean, my school wasn't diverse. You know, university was more, but like I had a very strong sense of who I am. And I think if I didn't have that strong sense of who I am, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. And I always encourage my students and my nieces and my nephews to do exactly the same thing. Because I think sometimes if you don't, you know, like I would have a real problem in terms of kind of like trying to downplay that aspect of who I am. But maybe in Kwasi Kwarteng, there's a term that is used in sociology. It's called disassociation as well. And like, you know, I've just written it down here about discourses around identity and stuff. And I think this is what we're talking about here. And your identity is often shaped by, you know, like your worldview is shaped by the people that you've moved with. So in his case, I mean, I don't know what you know, like whether he's had a similar experience to me in the sense that, like, you know, he's been rooted in a Ghanaian community. But if he hasn't, and you know, like he's not taught the language, because you have to remember that sometimes our parents didn't teach us the language because they wanted us to kind of like integrate, and that's a bit of your identity gone. But like if you haven't learned the language and then you haven't moved with other people, you haven't learned the culture, then this is going to have a bearing on how you see yourself and how you engage with other people like you. And I know that he came under a lot of fire when it came to the whole Windrush thing, and you know, the way that people are just like, you don't understand what it is that we've been through. And that I saw that, and I was actually really saddened. I was really, really saddened by that. And then, you know, like I remember talking to some other people from Caribbean origin, and they thought that we all thought the same. And I'm just like, no, many of us don't. But I think this does come, you know, like your identity. It's a very, I don't know, it's very nebulous. I think it's very dependent on your experience, how you see it, how you embrace it. But obviously, you know, like, not obviously, but like, you know, he's had a very different experience and he's embraced it in the, I don't know, he's formed his own identity that some people might say, well, it's not black, but for him, it's just a different kind of blackness. I don't know, but I just, yeah, I think it's a lot to do with like who you've moved with, how you've been grown, how you've grown up, how you've been socialized, you know, the circles you've moved in. And I think that shapes what you do and how you do it. So that's my thought on that.
This is
Sorry,
fascinating.
there's a lot in there.
I mean, Yeah, no, there's a whole lot in there, and there are so many ways in which we could develop this. Choma, you live in a place where it's normal to look like you.
Yes.
I mean, kind of, you're a
Yes.
member of the majority, and presumably you always have been, because
Yes.
I haven't. I mean, I was in an English boarding school at the age of 7.5.
Sure.
However, I've always enjoyed the counterweight of, I think it's my grandfather who insisted that I learn my mother's language, and my father who insisted that I learnt the language of the town in which we lived in, which was Accra, when we were in Accra, when we were in Ghana. So I speak 3 Ghanaian languages more or less fluently. The difference that makes to a person's identity is just difficult to describe. You either have it or you don't. So,
Yeah.
Chima, what about where you come from? Do you find this conversation we're having a little bit weird, a little bit strange, or are you sitting there and thinking, "Oh, these poor little lambs! Look at the trouble they're." Well, no, do share, because I want
No,
people over here to hear this point of view.
I find it very intriguing because, well, in Kenya, which has been my primary experience, what happens is that people tend to rally around ethnicity. So that's our guy, he's Kikuyu. That's our guy, he's Luo. And so everyone now gathers together around that person who is now the MP of this or the chairman of that or the CEO of this, and says that's our person, he's there. And then obviously they want to line up their relatives so they can get some jobs and things. But then we get nationalistic around our athletes. And so we start to celebrate the achievements of Kipchoge because, oh, he did this and he's going to go sub 2, sub 2 hours any day now. And, oh, we all believe it. And suddenly we are all Kenyans and we've forgotten the specific ethnicity that we come from. And so you see those things. But what I find interesting about Kenya is how earlier, 10 years ago, maybe about 10 years ago or so, it felt like all the African population was controlled by a tiny minority of Caucasian, European, and some American and some Asians, in a sense. So in terms of work life, the people who had the best jobs, the people who had the senior positions, the people who had the say-so, were not really African. Or if it was an African, it was an African who was not so African, in that he had assimilated more into a European, Asian type of mindset and culture. And it was very bizarre. It's like we were still colonized, even though I do say we're still colonized, but it was very evident then. And so even though we are the majority, we were not really in control of what was going on. And that's beginning to change more and more as we go forward. But the powerful thing that I'm thinking about in terms of identity, like I think Louise was saying, is when I think about Obama and what he did. Obama was very strategic about his identity. This dude, we didn't really know him. He just shows up one day in Kenya. He's a senator. And then he's like, yeah, I'm from here. And you're like, who are you? And, he goes back to the US and then he announces he's running for president. And now everyone in Kenya is like, that's our guy. Who is this guy? I don't know. So that's our man. And then, broader sections of Africans are like, that's our guy. And so Obama harnessed his Africanness to his advantage, but he also harnessed his Caucasianness to his advantage. It was a very interesting,
Mix.
very clever, strategy that he employed in order to try and draw all possible groups together. Because he just showed up, and there he is, he's giving talks, and we're like, okay, a US senator, we don't really care about this guy. Who is he? Why is he here? And I was immediately suspicious. And I wasn't this alert or aware of things then. So then now he goes and he gets voted in, and I'm like, something's really strange. But he was so smart about it. Now, possibly, if Kwasi had done that like just being smart about it, he could have galvanized a lot more support from the entire African community to surround him and, you know, give voice to his policies, give some kind of support or whatever. But I think that he may have left himself isolated
and open
to his disadvantage. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe.
So I can see in my private notes here that Louise wants to get in here. Elaine, I really want to bring you on, but your microphone, I've got to say, is cutting out. So we're hearing maybe 4 out of 5 words, and that's a little bit difficult. So you might like to fiddle with the volume a little bit and see, because I'm going to come to you after Louise. Louise, what did you want to share?
Yeah, okay. This conversation is my absolute dream as a sociologist, I have to say. But I think, Choma, I absolutely hear what you're saying. I absolutely so hear it. So, you know, the point that you made earlier about, you know, like, he's our man. Isn't it funny? And I'm sorry to say it, but like, sometimes as African people, we do this, don't we? Where we attach ourselves to people, and then, like, you know, it's because of their status and everything. And, you know, and it's almost like, you know, by attaching ourselves to those people symbiotically, we might think, oh, well, they've done that, and the gold dust is going to go on to us. Because I remember when Obama got in, and, you know, like, he was called, apparently in one part of Kenya, I remember seeing this on the news, that a lot of people were calling their kids either Barack or Michelle, because they somehow thought that, you know, this is it's going to kind of rub off onto them, which, you know, I get it. But then I also understand that within our culture, within African cultures, our names mean a lot as well. So I get that. But then I also wonder whether, you know, when you're talking about Obama, I think he was proud of his Kenyan identity. I read his autobiography, the something of my father. It's terrible. I should know what it is, but I forgot the name. Dreams of My Father. And, you know, I think he is genuinely proud of it. But I suspect that he may have, you know, sometimes people commodify their identities, you know, so they use it as a commodity. So, like, he may have commodified the black side of him, but then also the white side of him when he has to. But, like, I also get that feeling that, you know, he was actually proud of who he was. I'm not saying that Kwasi Kwarteng wasn't proud of who he was. It's just, we're probably, I don't know, like, maybe his way of showing it is different to what Obama's is. Maybe that's what it is.
Fascinating. Tina, I noticed you nodding there. What would you like to add?
With regards to the policy, I just don't think he was as shrewd. I don't think he was as calculated. And I did make mention of CEO and self-positioned chairman. Obama is very shrewd, calculated operator, by and large, because of his stepfather, and learned from watching his business operations. He was a multi-millionaire, and he was privy to that actually going down. Now, if you remember a time of kings, the assistants of kings were educated to serve kings. And then there are those who are educated to become kings. So kingmakers or kings are very different beast entirely. You cannot mistake one that is shrewd enough to become the head of an empire with that which is chosen to serve. And I think Kwasi was quite willing to fall on his own when he was only a patsy in the first place. And as I said, the Bank of England and those who truly govern Britain allow Liz Truss and Kwasi to be in a position to do whatever they wanted to do. And to be fair, when we talk about Kwasi having this mad economic plan, nothing happens in isolation. There is no policy that is released like a mini budget that could happen without chain of command and a number of people being involved. So let's get out of this that Kwasi had any kind of economic control. When you heard Gordon say that he was going to hand over the interest rates to the Bank of England, do you really think that was in Gordon's hands? Do you think it was in Gordon's interest to make? No Chancellor of the Exchequer is in that position with regards to power. And as Chioma said in the first place, if we aren't looking at the World Economic Forum and all of those in seniors who are the auspices, agenda and direction of the World Economic Forum, we're incredibly politically naive, and we should all go to class and face the naughty corner.
Well, face the naughty corner. That is so funny, Dean. It's very interesting because it was John Redwood who said that actually the first institution that started selling sterling was the Bank of England. And it's a feeding frenzy in the money markets. It's almost as if one person is doing something, everybody thinks, oh, he knows something we don't, let's get in on the act. So Redwood, who was himself a Tory, a very right-wing Tory, actually said that the people who started the rot was the very Bank of England. Now, I didn't want to bring this up because, kind of that conversation can go anywhere. So it was once the Bank of England started selling sterling, everybody else got into the act and sterling plummeted. And these things have got momentum. It's like can you imagine sharks asking sharks to stop eating when there is bloody flesh in the water? Very difficult to stop them once they get the taste for it. And so, these are all things that I think that we ought to look at. Now, I'm getting a bit of an SOS from Chioma over here. I know she has quite a taskmaster at home. I don't know whether it's the big guy, the little big guy, who is making demands. So Chioma, are you going to have to leave us? You're muted. You're muted. I've lost sound.
Yeah, sorry. I'll have to leave in about 2-3 minutes. Yes.
Okay. Well, terrific. Well, look. Share your parting thoughts and encourage us right here in the United Kingdom. What are your parting thoughts?
I think it's always a good thing when what was a strong man is shown to be vulnerable, especially to people who have been beholden, to that strong man for so long. So with the UK, Britain, whatever, getting visibly vulnerable and showing cracks in public, it's a very, very good time for people to actually start to make plans that do not necessarily hinge exclusively on that land, especially people of African origin. And so we can actually look at the situation and say, okay, we thought that the US and the UK was some sort of standard at some point, maybe in the 80s or the 70s. And it has been proven over time that every single one of their models and all their things just lead to some kind of decay. And that is not a helpful trajectory for Africa. So with every one of our secret weapons who are in the diaspora, observing the trends in these different countries, we now have enough intel to actually take back to Mother Africa and start to redirect our trajectories away from what is the common narrative that everybody seems to want to be embracing. We have a fantastic opportunity to look at the vulnerabilities, the weaknesses, the narrative, the absolute obsession with trying to keep everything on one particular track, and then say, okay, this is where they intend to go. Let's go back home and build something that is an answer to it. Kind of like Russia, trying to be controversial a little bit, but our own thing. So I would say that it's great to see the strangeness that's going on around you, because it means that there is an issue, and the issue has finally been exposed to this extent. And so use it, grab it, and turn it into an opportunity for Africa to finally get up on her feet.
Superb.
It was lovely talking to you all.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know how busy you are, and I know that you've got to go. So thanks for joining us, and let's do this again soon. Okay.
I would love to.
Thanks. See you again. Bye. Bye, Chairman. Okay. So well, The private chats that's going on here in the back, really absolutely riveting. Completely kind of, I lost my stroke there for a moment. This doesn't happen in a TV studio. But I think it's time for us to actually generally wind down the conversation. We've been at this for an hour and about 6 minutes. We normally run for about an hour and 10 minutes or so. I'm going to go round the other three guests who are here for your parting shots. Elaine, is your mic okay now?
I don't actually have a problem with my mic. Me at all.
Well, you don't have a problem with it, but we may have some difficulties. Still, I mean, your bon mots are so well valued. Share your parting thoughts about Kwasi Kwarteng, Rishi Sunak. What are your biggest takeaways? You got a minute now. You got a minute and a half.
For Kwasi Kwarteng, I'd like to say that, you know, we all have the many societal and social influences that, you know, guide or what we don't do. And for Kwasi Kwarteng, if you think about it, this guy's been called Kwasi Kwarteng. Now, my name is Elaine Bannerman. I mean, I could be called something else. I could be called now to something like that. You know, and I can only imagine, you know, throughout his school years, the number of times people possibly made because his name was Kwasi Kwarteng, and he went to all these highly elitist. So to some extent, he held on to that identity. I'm sure he never went home in tears to say, "I don't like my name, Kwasi Kwarteng. It's a funny name. Can you call me John Brown or something like that?" No, he didn't. He kept his name Kwasi Kwarteng, and that tells me that he stood for his name. His name was a Ghanaian name. He always had this Ghanaian name, and he died by this Ghanaian name. And so to me, I think he may not have that many associations with Ghanaian politics, Ghanaian economics, or other matters Ghanaian, which Sunak may do, which actually puts him in a better position to be prime minister in India the way he does. But however, I would also say that Kwasi Kwarteng was for PM, so he didn't need all of that. But at the same time, yes, I think perhaps this may be something he'd considered, maybe something he had tried and hadn't worked out. If he formed some relationships with his age, but at the same time, I would applaud him for having gone through school with the name Kwasi Kwarteng and always identifying as Ghanaian, and I think that's what I'd say for him.
Okay, terrific. Now I'm going to come to Dean. Elaine, thank you so much. Dean, you know, in 90 seconds, you know, what's your takeaway about Kwasi, Richie, and the situation in the United Kingdom right now?
I think the optics of the illusion of inclusion are as transparent as the predetermined operation to present those who are, by and large, inclined to think exactly the same as white racists, deliver white racist policies and legislation. I think it's all fallen apart. I think that in terms of Rishi Sunak, he is a willing pawn who will not only benefit economically, but in terms of his power globally, which will further enrich him. And it falls perfectly in line with his agenda. So if you are willing to be ruthlessly ambitious and serve white supremacy in its purest form, I think is fantastic. And I think Kemi Badenoch missed the trick as well, because she should have been in there. And I'm quietly confident she will. But the illusion of inclusion are merely optics that don't include our collective interests. And we shouldn't be skipping through our hands and celebrating for optics, because those who put those optics in place are highly premeditated, and they've done a fantastic job.
Okay, thank you so much. So beware of the hang on, I got another I'm getting stuff coming in the private chats here which make me giggle. Yes, beware of the optics and don't believe everything you see, AD. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, who's to bring up the rear? We got Louise. Louise,
okay,
take it away.
Thank you. So my thought is this: in many ways, I mean, I agree with you in terms of the optics and stuff, because I think we can have people, you know, people there, but then also it's what they do. So you know, yeah, it's what they do. So the two have to marry up. So we're going to see what they'll do, what Rishi does, but what they do is that, in much as we may disagree with their politics and their approaches, they do sort of challenge a narrative about who is intelligent, because, like, you know, as I've said, there's a long-standing idea that, you know, because we are Black or because we belong to minority ethnic groups, we can't be intelligent. But there's a hell of a lot of intelligent people from this, and I think in a way they kind of make people have to, like, you know, just think, give their heads a little bit of a wobble. But I mean, sometimes I think you might be intelligent, but my cousin Cobby, I'm going to give a little shout out to Cobby, but Cobby said the other day, so that sometimes tomatoes are fruit, but you don't always have to you can't put them in the fruit salad, right? And sometimes, like in Kwasi Kwarteng's place, I mean, to be fair, he didn't have long enough to be Chancellor, and I do not agree with anything that he did, but maybe that wasn't the position for him. Do you know what I mean? That maybe it wasn't, okay? Maybe he might have been better suited elsewhere. With Rishi Sunak, we're just going to see what he does, and where the out thing is. I mean, he's seen as a safe pair of hands. To see whether he unites the Conservative Party, I don't know. I wish him good luck with that. I really wish him good luck with it. But we're just going to see what he does. So yeah, in a sense, they challenge the narratives, and I think that's not a bad thing. But then, you know, like sometimes, as I say, the optics, it's not always the way that it just looks. It's what is going on underneath, and what it is that they're trying to promote, and what it is that they do. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you so much. Nobody asked me what my opinion was.
Yeah, what is your opinion? Tell us.
Oh, you're so kind. Boy, did I have to dig for that. The point is this. We need to keep our eyes peeled, because things are never as they appear to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't judge, as they say, you can't ever judge a book by its cover. And if you make your judgments based on what you see and observe and hear people say, you're very likely going to be gaslighted, fooled, misled, and so on. And at this stage in my life, it seems quite clear to me that we need to use our emotional and spiritual intelligence intuitively. If you are in touch with yourself, you may not be able to put your finger on quite why something is off, but you will see something that's off. You will smell it from 10 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
Afterwards, the evidence will be made visible. So I would say to all our listeners, beware of what the media tells you. Think carefully about the things that are presented to you, and be in touch with yourself so that you can really, really harness your spirituality as well as your intellectual intelligence to evaluate situations. And that really brings us to the end.
Can I just say one thing? I will promise I will shut up.
Are you going to quote Shaw Taylor?
Yeah. Sorry, this is a sign of my age, but no, I mean, I totally agree with you in terms of kind of like being in touch with our with our critical selves. But the other thing I would say is that, like, you know, if you are in a position of power, I mean, you know, maybe we're not going to be up, like, you know, where they are and stuff like that. But like, I don't think that you should be bringing the holes. I mean, I think we should be bringing people up with us. So, I mean, I take my own thing as a black female professor. I want to see more, because there's only 51 of us. So, you know, like, you can't be just as a black female professor brought me up, I have to do the same for other people. Don't shut the door with stop people coming up behind you. So I think, yeah, don't pull up the drawbridge. But this is what's happening.
Terrific. Well, what I can say is that there was a police program on, I don't know, was it 20 or 30 years back? It was presented by...
It was in the 70s.
Oh, shit.
And early 80s. So we're going back 40 years.
Oh, Dean, stop that. So anyway, Shaw Taylor apparently was 40 years ago, but his outline, he presented programs about things that have been stolen, crimes that have been committed. And the idea was for people to phone the police and give them tips and leads and so on to solve these crimes. And his outline was always, he'd touch his nose and go, keep them peeled. And that's exactly what we have to do now. Yeah. Everybody, thanks so much. I want to thank Dean Okine for his fantastic contributions. Elaine, thank you for your time and effort getting here. And of course, as ever, the Professor Louise Owusu-Kwarteng. Did I get that right or what?
Yes, you did. I'll allow you.
And you know, with that, we'll all say good night. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for inviting us.
Okay. Pleasure.